What drives a powerful clan to defy an empire, even if it means their own destruction? Was it pure ambition, a lust for power, or something far more insidious lurking in the shadows of their lineage? Today, we're dissecting the Shi Clan Rebellion, the defining event of the Apothecary Diaries' second season, and expose how a society built on control gave rise to its most dangerous traitors. The Shi clan is one of the three great clans that founded the Empire of Li. In the Empire's foundational myth, the Mother Royal, a foreign-born noblewoman, traveled with three warriors and settled in the lands that would become the Li Empire. Each of those warriors founded a noble clan and became governor of one of the three major provinces. The northern territory came to be known as Shihoku Province, governed by the Shi clan. For generations, the Shi served as hereditary overseers of this province, wielding significant autonomy far from the imperial capital. Their seat of power was the northern capital, a bastion of tradition, secrecy, and ironclad hierarchy. They effectively ruled the region in the emperor's name. But with privilege came decay. While other clans modernized or aligned with imperial reform, the Shi clung to power by any means, including illicit trade and quiet defiance. And before going any further, let's get this out of the way. This video contains spoilers for everything covered in the first two seasons of the Apothecary Diaries. If you're not caught up and don't want to be spoiled, now's probably the time to click away. Now that that's settled, let's move on. The relevant part of our analysis starts a couple of decades before the events of the main series, during the reign of the former emperor, or more accurately, during the rule of his mother, the Empress Regnant, who was the de facto leader of Li. A controversial figure, who frankly deserves her own deep dive, the Empress Regnant oversaw one of the most significant reforms in the empire's history, the abolition of slavery. Unfortunately, as is too often the case, banning something doesn't mean it disappears. The Shi clan, emboldened by their perceived hereditary rights, their geographic isolation, as well as good old-fashioned greed, secretly continued to export slaves out of the country despite the imperial ban. This illicit trade was enriching them, but threatened the emperor's authority, which, of course, left the Empress Regnant with the need to take action. As punishment and leverage, the Empress Regnant forced the Shi clan's leader to surrender his daughter, Lady Shenmei, to the imperial harem as a high-ranking consort. At the time, Shenmei had been promised to Shi Shou, a young, cunning upstart from a small branch of the Shi clan, a very capable man who was fiercely in love with his fiancée. By holding Shenmei hostage in the inner palace, the Empress Regnant curbed the Shi clan's power and forced them to halt their trading. Now, you may have noticed the irony. Curbing slavery by forcibly taking a young woman's freedom and using her as a political tool. And that's probably the point. This story is full of such messy moments that highlight the ambiguity of human action, especially within a society in which treating people like property is deeply normalized. It's important to note that at this stage, Shenmei did not resist the Empress's decision. A vain and ambitious young woman, she saw an opportunity. Becoming a consort meant proximity to power. Her goal? To bear the Emperor's child and rise to the position of Empress Dowager. Alas, her hopes would be dashed, but we'll get back to that in a moment. With Shenmei stuck in the palace, Shi Shou took the initiative to appease the Empress Regnant. He proposed expanding the inner palace to employ the former slaves as eunuchs and maidservants instead. Now, some might ask, why not just free them? And here's where the social complexities kick in. Abolishing slavery doesn't automatically dismantle the underlying causes that made such practices normal in this society to begin with. These people, many of whom were likely sold off by families who couldn't afford to support them, had nowhere to go, nor did they have many means of supporting themselves. Remember that the average Li citizen had almost no access to anything resembling an education. It is why we see throughout the series that while slavery in its strictest forms is no longer legal in Li, practices such as indentured servitude are still very much commonplace. Just look at Mao Mao's situation at the start of the series, or the lives of the courtesans at Verdigris' house. Given all that, Shi Shou's compromise was genuinely clever. It both ended the illegal human trafficking and provided a practical solution that the palace could accept. And the Empress Regnant was impressed. His loyalty and political savvy earned him her favor, and soon after, Shisho was appointed Prime Minister of Li and became the official head of the Shi clan. Now let's go back to Shenmei and her dreams of becoming empress. Soon after entering the Rear Palace, she found out what many throughout the kingdom knew, that she, a 16-year-old girl, was too old for the emperor's tastes. The emperor, whom we shall henceforth refer to as Emperor Pedo, no reason, nope, turned his attention to her 10-year-old lady-in-waiting, Tai-Ho, a distant relative of the clan. Tai-Ho became pregnant with the emperor's child, an outcome that the Empress Regnant absolutely did not want included in the line of succession. So a scapegoat was selected. A court physician was blamed and banished from the palace along with the child, while Tai-Ho was shunned by her mistress but forbidden from leaving the inner court for the rest of her days, a fate shared by all the young girls who received the attention of Emperor Pedo. During the series' current timeline, Tai-Ho has been dead for a couple of months. The two castaways, the exiled illegitimate princess and the physician, were taken in by the Shi clan. Later, at Emperor Pedo's request, Shenmei, the illegitimate princess, effectively doing the emperor a favor by giving his unacknowledged daughter a so-called respectable place in life. With this prince's wife, Shisho had his first child, a daughter named Shisui, whom we later come to know as Suirei. Years later, once the former emperor passed and political tides shifted, Shenmei was released from the rear palace back to Shisho as a reward for his loyal service. Once again, a woman being used as a political pawn will be the catalyst for all the strife yet to come. Despite his new family, Shisho clearly still loved Shenmei deeply, even after all those years, and that love would prove to be his fatal weakness. Shenmei returned from the palace bitter and vengeful, still wounded with what she saw as a humiliating rejection by the emperor, but her vanity and ambition remained intact. Upon discovering that Shisho had remarried and fathered a daughter, Shenmei's ego could not tolerate the situation. She murdered his first wife and turned her malice towards the child, stripping her of both her name and identity. This is why we only know her as Suirei in the present timeline. The Shi character is a naming convention within the Shi clan, and removing it was Shenmei's ways of erasing the husband's first family. Little is known about Shisho's reaction to this string of events. His infatuation with this woman seemed to have rendered him willfully blind to her cruelty, at least in the beginning. With Shenmei, Shisho had a second daughter, Loulan, who was also given the name Shisui. Yet even her own child was not spared from Shenmei's abuse. Under her mother's iron rule, Loulan became a doll, obedient and emotionless on the surface, a pawn to be used in her mother's schemes. Still, Loulan and Suirei grew close, especially when Shenmei wasn't watching. Loulan's love for insects, in fact, seems to have been influenced by her older sister. It was likely during this same period that the Shi clan began quietly fortifying their stronghold and manufacturing gunpowder and firearm components, with foreign assistance from the neighboring country of Shao. This was highly unusual, as gun-making was not yet widespread in Li, and it was a clear sign that the clan was preparing for something bigger. Suirei and Loulan were soon made into pawns in the clan matriarch's quest for revenge and power. This included sending Suirei to the outer palace as a low-ranking court lady for the purpose of assassinating Jinshi, the imperial younger brother and, at the time, the only living male heir. These are the events that depicted in the second half of Season 1 of the Apothecary Diaries. At the same time, through her father's interference, because not even the emperor dared refuse the influential prime minister of the country, Loulan entered the inner palace as a high-ranking concubine, effectively an agent embedded within the imperial harem. Once again, a woman is used as a pawn in a larger game of power, just another Tuesday in the country of Li's imperial court. The goal of Shenmei's plan was likely to destabilize the imperial family by removing Jinshi from the line of succession and seizing influence through Loulan, who, had she become pregnant, could have produced the next heir, and with that, a claim to become empress. Now, despite her apparent passivity, Loulan did not fully submit to the plan. She deliberately consumed poisonous fruits to prevent any possible pregnancy. While both her and Suirei appear to go along with the matriarch's plan, it's important to recognize the depth of their childhood trauma. Years of abuse and control had left them extremely vulnerable to Shenmei's manipulation, making resistance difficult. Moreover, given her grandmother's tragic fate at the hands of the former emperor, it's understandable that Suirei held no affection for the imperial family. Most importantly, though, the law of the land meant that from the moment Shenmei began plotting treason, the entire Shi clan's survival was on the line, and any reveal of said plot would ultimately mean the end of the entire clan. The harsh reality of this society is that punishments for crimes are not brought only onto the perpetrator, but sometimes, depending on severity, also on their families as well. It's likely why, after the failed assassination attempt, Suirei entered the rear palace disguised as a eunuch. By this point, both sisters were probably preparing for the inevitable downfall and searching for a way to protect the clan's children. Their plan? The use of a resurrection drug, the same one Suirei had used to fake her death after the plot against Jinshi was exposed. The idea was to assimilate poisoning, making it appear as though the children had died, and thus eliminate the need for retaliation against them. The problem was, of course, that this drug came with possible side effects. Suirei herself was left with mobility issues in one arm, and there were concerns about potential neurological effects, including memory loss. This is where Mao Mao came into the picture. Having witnessed Mao Mao's sharp mind and deep knowledge of medicinal herbs, Suirei wanted her help to improve the drug, and was willing to resort to force to obtain it. The ghost stories incident, where the participants nearly passed out because of the smoke, was likely their first attempt to incapacitate Mao Mao in order to take her out of the imperial grounds. While both sisters likely conspired in this plan, it's worth emphasizing that Loulan's alter ego as Shi Shui and her friendship with Mao Mao were genuine. These moments were not part of a deception, but rare glimpses of who Loulan truly was. A girl who loved bugs, who was curious, and who desperately wanted to experience real friendship. Mao Mao's kidnapping was triggered by the fact that, thanks to her sharp wit, she quickly began noticing that things were not as they should be. While it was Mao Mao's disappearance that initially caught Jinshi's attention, it was the discovery that Loulan had also vanished from the real palace that turned suspicion toward the Shi clan. Let's not forget, as a high-ranking consort, Loulan was considered the emperor's property and not allowed to leave her gilded cage. Her sudden absence was a direct affront to imperial authority. This incident also prompted Shisho to retreat from public life, withdrawing to the clan's stronghold and avoiding having to answer for his daughter's elopement. Arguably, this alone should have been enough to justify military involvement, but Jinshi, being young, relatively inexperienced, and likely unsure of himself, chose to wait and gather more evidence. Fortunately, the unusual trades activities required to build the clan's armaments and fortify their position had left a paper trail, one that Lahan was able to uncover. The Shi clan's final stand takes place at an old mountain fortress tucked deep within Shihoku. There, Shenmei, Shisho, Loulan, Suirei, and an unwilling Mao Mao had gathered. The geography of their stronghold, combined with their use of early firearm technology, initially gave them a tactical advantage. However, neither Loulan nor her father ever intended to support Shenmei to the bitter end. That advantage was effectively neutralized when Loulan set fire to the gunpowder storage, disabling their ability to defend themselves. This allowed the Forbidden Army, the Imperial military, to reclaim the fortress without significant casualties, at least on the Imperial side. And Lakan doesn't count. Now, even without Loulan's sabotage, Shenmei's rebellion was doomed. Their munitions would have eventually run out, especially considering that these were early firearms, not modern rapid-firing weapons. But then again, Shenmei wasn't exactly trying to win a war with sound strategy. Her motivations were never tactical, they were personal, vanity and revenge. The outcome is clear. Shisho is killed by palace guards while threatening Jinshi, and it is Loulan herself who facilitates her mother's death. I want to take a minute to remark on Shisho's role in all of this. It's implied that, by the end, his involvement in Shenmei's rebellion was mostly performative. That he deliberately allowed certain corrupt individuals within the clan to become entangled in the plot so they would fall with him. But to me, that reads as a weak excuse. The story seems to want us to view Shisho as someone tragically blinded by love, yet ultimately noble, a man who just wanted the best for his country. And personally, I don't buy it. Shisho was the one person in a position to stop all of this, and he chose not to. His infatuation with Shenmei ruled his life, and it caused not only his own future, but also brought ruin to his entire clan. It's Loulan who I see as the true heroine of this arc. And in her honor, I want to close this video by focusing on what I consider her most powerful moment, the scene where she scars Jinshi's cheek. This moment is loaded with symbolism. On the surface, the reason seems clear. She's granting her mother a posthumous wish, a final act of vengeance against those who wronged her. Jinshi's resemblance to the former emperor makes this gesture even more pointed. But I would argue it's more than just inherited anger. It's also Loulan's own quiet rebellion, a rejection of the imperial system that has, time and again, treated women as disposable pawns. Her blade doesn't just mark Jinshi's skin, it carves out the space for herself, even if only for a fleeting second, in a system that never wanted to see her as a person in the first place. And maybe, just maybe, that perfect unblemished face of Jinshi's reminded her of what her mother tried to make her into. A porcelain doll, flawless and obedient, but hollow inside. By scarring that perfection, she was also freeing herself from the role she was forced to play. The Shi Clan Rebellion isn't just a story of betrayal and ambition. It's a story of how personal wounds ripple outward through generations, of how systems fail and how individuals like Loulan carry the weight of both their heritage and their trauma. Sometimes rebellion doesn't look like fire and swords. Sometimes it's a single cut, sharp, deliberate, and unspoken. If you enjoyed this dive into the Apothecary Diaries, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Do you think Loulan deserved better? And more importantly, should Connie get hazard pay for sitting through this emotional chaos? Thanks for watching, and as always, take care of yourselves.